US, but because Gurdjieff is Armenian and his travels, it gave kind of Armenian identity much kind of flavorful and like colorful tone. That's what I really liked, because otherwise what's happening in Armenia now, everything around all the like political levels and everything is trying to fit us in this tiny space where our culture becomes, they kind of like try to cut our identity, like shrink it as our land is shrunk.
Hello and welcome to Dispersion. Dispersion is a podcast by the Zoology Institute that analyzes and celebrates both the diverse and common experiences of diasporas living away from their homeland. As always, I'm your host, Jen. It's hard for me to believe that we're already in a fourth season, and this one is a special one. In this season of Dispersion, the Zoology Institute will be speaking with notable artists from the global Armenian diaspora. These guests will share their personal journeys that have led them to where they are today, as well as the motivations and inspirations behind their work. Today, I'm joined by two wonderful artists in their own right, Shushanik Droshakiryan and Jackie Kazarian. As always, their full bios will be in the show notes, so I encourage you to take a look, get to know our guests a little bit better, as well as their works, which we're going to be talking about at length today. So there'll be some links for you to check out. By way of an introduction, I'd like to open the conversation up to our two guests. And I'd like, if you can, to share a little bit about your journey. So maybe how your families migrated, the journeys that brought them to where you are today. And subsequently, how did you each come to establish yourself in your current cities? Maybe Jackie, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to be here and have this conversation. So my grandparents emigrated from the Ottoman Empire. My grandfathers came in the 1890s, early 1900s, and my grandmothers came over during the genocide, and they were from the grandfathers were from Adana and Tadim, which is in Kirkuk. And then my grandmother was from Sebastia, and then the other was from Marash, and also lived in Istanbul when her father was killed in Istanbul. So they had different ways of emigrating. Both the women were in orphanages, and one was selected to be a wife of a man who was in the United States that had come, and the other had an uncle that was living in the U.S. and helped her and her mother to escape, and she was collected and sent the money for them to collect her. They went through Syria. Some of them went through Syria. Some of them ended up in Marseille for a while, and the men went to Russia. One of them was a farmer, went to Russia, went to Poland as a farmer, went to Germany as a farmer, and then eventually earned enough money to come to the United States. So my parents both grew up in, my father grew up in Waukegan, Illinois. My mother was in Milwaukee. She was born in Chicago, and I've lived in Chicago for the last 40 years, with some sojourns into California and North Carolina.
To escape those cold Chicago winters.
Yes.
The first and only time I went to Chicago was in February, and I remember thinking, okay, Ottawa's cold. Chicago is also really cold.
Yeah.
And Shushanik, for you, tell us the kind of same of your journey and how you are where you are today, and your family as well.
Yeah, so my family lives in Yerevan, and well, I am from Yerevan, but my grandparents are from father's side is from Tigranakert, so Diyarbakir, and my mom's side is from Mush. And basically, my grandpa was the only one who stayed in the Eastern Armenia after the genocide, and the other brothers, like 5 of them, they managed to get to Syria and then to US, and their children basically managed to find me, and we do have this reunion in Vermont. I have an aunt, Dana Walrath, and she played a big role in the Senate of Vermont to promote Armenian, to help them understand our story and she did manage to change a lot legally. And yeah, so I do have these connections, but I am basically from Yerevan, and I moved to Amsterdam because I think I could not really understand Yerevan and the eastern part of Armenia. I was slightly delusional, and in terms of like creative freedom, the aesthetic culture that eastern part of Armenia was kind of promoting under like Russian kind of influence was very much making me angry. So I realized I need to be alone in an environment like Amsterdam, where like cultural diversity is valued and there is space to experiment. And yeah, that's how I basically ended up here.
Wonderful. Thank you both for sharing that little bit of background and context. I think it's always helpful to root us in the conversation and also to shed some light on what has built you both into the people you are. And of course, because we're talking about art, it's very hard to separate identity and our histories as people from that, as I'm sure we're going to explore a little bit. Jackie, I'd like to start with you as we start to make our way into discussing both of your works and your passions. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, Project 1915, and how it commemorates the Armenian genocide?
Sure. In 2015, I embarked on making a painting, a big monumental painting. I always think of it in English, but it's like 4 meters tall and about almost 10 meters wide. It's the same size as Guernica, Picasso's famous painting about the aerial bombing of the civilian population in northern Spain. And it's kind of my impetus was one to honor my grandparents, but also growing up as an Armenian. When I grew up, nobody knew what that meant. The only thing was like my friends' parents knew that they had to clear their plate at dinner because of the starving Armenians. So I went through much of my childhood and my adult years with people not knowing where and what Armenia was. In fact, I think until the war, many people didn't really know what it was. So I knew that people remembered about what happened in Guernica because of what Picasso created, and so with that idea, I decided that I wanted to make a painting that sort of did the same thing. And if I made a great painting, it would educate. It would be an opportunity for Armenians to sort of to see for themselves a grand public acknowledgement of what they had experienced, their ancestors had experienced. And so I embarked on doing a lot of research. I didn't know a lot of things, and I decided really early on that it had to be very personal. I had to do research, but also I had to make the painting personal for me. And so the painting is a mixture. Images from the Armenian illuminated manuscripts, the architectural floor plans of a lot of the monuments, the Armenian monuments, and it also references ancient Christian maps, TO maps they're called. So the whole painting is, and the names of all the villages involved in the genocide were depicted in Armenian, written in Armenian, but also phonetically in English. So people, both Armenians and the general public, could read what these villages' names were, because many of the names don't exist on maps anymore. And it was oriented as a TO map, with east is at the top and south is to the right, and so on. It also has the images are sort of overlaid with a network of my grandmother's needlework, which is called tatting. And so I made silk screens from her actual needlework, and those are sort of knit together a lot of the images. And then the bottom of the painting are gestures that I remembered from my childhood when my grandmother prayed. She had a gesture of receiving grace from God with her hands out. And so there's hands at the large, massive hands at the bottom of the painting that I think of both as receiving grace, but also as sort of resignation, like this is what happened, sort of that kind of thing.
And can you tell us a little bit about the experience or how it was to try and integrate a historical event into your art? I know you mentioned that you did research and you wanted to strike this balance between bringing that perspective and bringing your own personal history and ancestral history. Was there a sense of responsibility you felt putting it into this piece?
Yes, I did. I felt it was really, I worked on the painting for about 5 or 7 months. Yeah, about 7 months. And it took a toll. It was the emotions that I sort of harbored from my parents and my grandparents emerged during the process of making that work. And it ended up being very difficult for me physically in the end. But I did feel a responsibility to be accurate. So I reached out to academics in the Army, like Christina Moranci, who is at Tufts University, is an expert in Armenian architectures. And there were certain peoples that I reached out to clarify the language and the writing. So I felt a lot of responsibility to get things as accurate as I could. But I also felt I think that I just felt like I wanted to, in some ways, I wanted to get the pain done with. Like, so this is it, sort of, I wanted to go beyond, just get past it. So I think I felt a responsibility to myself, even to try to move beyond all of that internal sadness.
I think one of the powerful things, I've seen the piece, I know the work, one of the powerful things about representing history or historical events in art is it can encourage people then to go on and have their own experience with research, maybe different than like reading something or consuming literature that gives you a sense of all the answers. There are so many different elements included in that work that my hope, and maybe this is yours as well, that it would encourage people then to go on and have their own take their own initiative to learn more, right? To start to understand broader pieces. I think that's what's, to me, has always been really powerful about when we have this intersection between history and memory and art. Yeah, I always feel when I see pieces that I know I have a sensation towards them, but I don't know enough to know why all the elements are here and why this was chosen and why this representation of color or texture matters. So I'm sure that's inspired a lot of people to have their own journey with, like you say, maybe learning about Armenia and its history for the first time, if that's not something that was even on their radar before. I'm sure that's been the case.
Yeah, I mean, some people who, it was shown, the painting first was not first, but second was shown at the Civic Center of Chicago. And it was very powerful for me to see how the general public reacted to it. And, and some people just thought it was just a spectacular, beautiful painting. That's it, and then, but there were little snippets in there that made them want to learn more, like you said. And I was perfectly happy and comfortable with making a beautiful painting.
Yeah. So how amazing that it has served so many purposes, right?
Yeah.
Shushanik, for you, can you tell us a little bit about the Armenian narratives, the ones that are present behind your work, the Venus and Fury Lab? Talk to us a little bit more about that work and that project.
Yes. Before I move on about my lab, I would like to reflect on I would like to say idea of pain, because I don't want to have it as a kind of way of life. But I do think it's for every single Armenian, and especially in Armenia now, it's every single person's like personal experience. it might be stronger in diaspora because the distance creates this kind of a different type of feeling. But I would like to say that in that sense, it's a bit unfortunate, of course, but in sense of just having one thing in common, I feel like every Armenian person has that pain, no matter which level of artistic awareness. That's something that definitely relates all of us. And Venus in Fury, it's very much about pain. It's just the anger I felt during the 44 days long war. I don't even like mentioning that whole sentence, but like technically losing Artsakh was very painful. And I was in Netherlands living, and I was absolutely, in a way, useless, and feeling like that I can't do anything. And the distance was also making me to realize what diaspora actually feels when they look at what's happening in Armenia. So first time I was in that position, and that's where I made a decision that I need to create a powerful kind of creative bomb for myself, and very personal again. Like, this was a responsibility for myself, and yes, for all the boys and soldiers we lost. I was like, I mean, they were younger than I am, and if I was a boy, probably I would be in the same reality. That's how I decided to open a one-woman lab and named it Venus in Fury. I thought, yeah, this is the only thing I can feel. And I also felt that I'm going to feel this anger for probably the rest of my life, but at least I can put that anger into creative work, because I felt that, the scale of this, the solution we Armenians need for ourselves to kind of reclaim our identity is such a big cultural need. Besides the lens and the reality we live in. So I just decided to put everything into this lab. And since then, I think, I had 3 years working on my own. And I recently patented my innovative biomaterial, which is seaweed based. And I basically started using all the PowerPoints that Dutch Dutch people have. I mean, the water, the seaweed, Dutch wool, and I combined it. But the very idea I used, basically, it came from Gurdjieff. And apparently Gurdjieff is very well known in Europe, not really in Armenia, unfortunately. But his mystic Sufi dances, there was a lot of narrative that inspired me. And then I decided to, have him as my kind of Armenian self. Yes, and I turned that narrative of his, which was about Sufi men, all this, religious, like weirlings, and all this, like, and in Europe, that always feels this like exotic worlds that they kind of seem to be attracted. So I kind of used those things in the beginning, but of course Gurdjieff is like mine. So I did not make an effort to kind of connect. I already have it, but it was very challenging to think of an Armenian concept that wouldn't be like, an Armenian girl is showing off her Armenian narrative. That's why Dutch wool and Dutch seaweed with Gurdjieff together created this kind of very interesting mix, which was, I didn't know that artistic statement is going to bring me to material innovation and hopefully soon production. And yes, so it was a very strange combination of like multiple realities. And that's how my lab kind of like empowered my lab. And I'm still in that wave, basically.
I think what it makes me think of, and I know obviously we're talking about the specificity of art and creating, but in lots of the conversations we've had with members of diasporas globally, they tell this kind of similar experience of not knowing that the product of their homeland culture with their hostland culture was going to come together to create something new. And I'm going to do something which I seem to always fall back on, which is talk about food. But food for me is always such a relatable experience. But it makes me think of fusion cultures and how people don't always go into creating recipes or creating elements of cuisine that are a fusion But what you're kind of doing is you're taking your experience outside of your body and you're creating something with that, right? You yourself are going through this kind of juxtaposition between two cultures, and you're living away from one and you're surrounded by another, and you're having all these influences. And then what comes out of you as a creative is this kind of manifestation of those tensions, I think. And to me, that's where art in the diaspora is so fascinating. Whether it's music or dance, or multimedia art, whatever it is, it's one of the sharpest ways I think we can see that experience of being part of a diaspora. And one of kind of leads me into my next question, actually, which centers around one of the themes or one of the pieces that are in the special Armenian issue of the Institute's Diaspora Journal, which helps to inspire this podcast and helps to inspire a lot of the themes, is an article by David Clark and Nina Parrish about memory books. And they talk about memory books as compilations of stories and photographs and other materials. And they talk about how memory books recover or can recover memories of ethnic coexistence in Armenia, as well as highlighting lives and communities that are often left out of these big, broad national histories. So keeping that in mind, do you see the role of art functioning similarly as a way to preserve what might be otherwise forgotten or overlooked or misrepresented? How does art and creation fit into telling these very niche narratives or these very specific experiences? I'm going to let whoever wants to jump in. That's a big, broad question, but I'd really like to spend some time here on memory and art together and where they overlap. Jackie, you have something on the tip of your tongue.
I have. Well, I think of some of the work that I've done when I reference the Armenian culture. I think of that in some ways as being a documentation of how I, a specific Armenian person in specific history, specific moment in time, in a specific climate, towards genocide, or or whether it's that, or it's where we're changing the words, we're questioning the language. I just feel like my work is a result, a documentation of how I respond to those forces at this moment. So I don't really feel like I'm out to teach people necessarily, aside from, I felt like the big painting, yes, but the other works were more just following my own curiosity about images, and like exploring. I've always been fascinated with other cultures and how it intersects with Armenian culture. My husband's Irish. When I went to Armenia and I said, oh my God, Armenia's, the Kachkars are just like Celtic knots, right? And so I spent some time, I always asked, said, we're a crossroads culture, Armenians are crossroads people. There are things when I went to Turkey, there are things in Turkey, that are habits that are both Turkish and Armenian, and there are and images and rituals even that are both, and of course the food. I'm always feel like my memory. It's good. I guess I feel like I'm sort of going off base here a little, but I feel like a responsibility to engage other cultures in my journey, and be curious about them. I went to Syria. I went to Lebanon and Beirut, and to talk to people in the diaspora, different areas. So,
do you feel like that curiosity, Jackie? And I'm fully following your off base here because I love it and it's made me curious. That curiosity of other cultures brings your own experience with your Armenian identity into sharper light? Do you think when you see these crossroads, you think, oh yes, that's where this part of my memory, or that's where this comes into play, and that's where this comes from? You're kind of hunting down those different pieces.
Yeah. I just feel like it brings me closer to other people.
Yes.
That's what I feel.
Yes.
Like when I went to Peru and I saw that they also work with cochineal dyes, the red dye that Armenians that were used in the lunar manuscripts. And I saw a woman wipe it around her lips, and I just felt like I just wanted to kiss her, and it's yeah, I just
That
felt like
shared thread, right? You
that
start to
shared
see it.
that
Yeah.
shared love of something,
Mm,
that red. You love
yeah.
that red too. Oh my God.
Well, it's fascinating, and I'm taking us further on a tangent, but I promise, Shushanik, I get back to you because I know
It's
you have
okay.
things to contribute to this. But I think we think in many ways that globalization and the advent of social media has made it easier for us to see these connections. But I don't think anything is as strong as experiencing it for yourself, right? Like,
Mhm.
Jackie, to that exact example, you could have seen a video of a woman doing that or talking about it, but is it as powerful as a connector as actually experiencing it? And that's, yeah, there's something really fascinating about the topic of digital diaspora and how diaspora stay connected with the use of social media and technology. But I think there's something to be said for that curiosity and experiencing it for yourself, and then that unearths part of your own cultural identity. Yeah, okay, I could go on for that. We could have a whole other conversation about that.
Yeah.
But Jackie, jump in if you have something else. I
Well,
promise
I
you
was
would
going to
follow all
ask
these.
Shushanik because when I saw that you were engaged with the Sufism, I was wondering if it was directly about in our India, and was there a connection to India, or was it Armenians in India, or
It was a reference from Gurdjieff's travels when he was traveling, and he kind of discovered these hidden schools. And it's basically after I read his book, Meeting Miraculous Men. Yes, and that's where there's a section about Sufi caves and all the whirling techniques, and that this man kept like moving around because people were not treating them well. And then there was this slight reference about them wearing woolen garments. And that's where I felt, yes, this is the thing I can use as a connection. Uh, Yes, so basically it was through Gurdjieff, through his books and his memories. Yeah, connecting it
uh,
back to the question. So
mhm.
I kind of, because uh, I do not really have a memory as, I mean, yeah, sorry, this was a bit abstract, but I meant Gurdjieff has this very big sense of time and his work, and just the fact that he's one of the most controversial mystics of 19th century. It's because he almost had like control over time. And when you read his books, imagine him when he's trying to explain something, it has this strange feeling that it happened to you because he's very influential. So I think for me, reading it, it was already, I was acting as if that's my memory, my experience. I am easily being identified uh, with him, and that's how I connected it. No, and only then I researched and realized, okay, yes, Sufis do exist. They exist in many different areas in the East. Yes, but because Gurdjieff is Armenian and his travels, it gave kind of Armenian identity much kind of flavorful and like colorful tone. That's what I really liked, because otherwise what's happening in Armenia now, everything around all the like political levels and all everything is trying to fit us in this tiny space where our culture becomes, they kind of like try to cut our identity, like shrink
Mm,
it as our land is shrunk. But like that's why culture, and that's why what we are doing, not me, only me and Jackie, but like whoever is creating and working with culture, because it doesn't seem like you're doing anything sometimes, uh,
Yeah, yeah,
yes,
just
I
a,
think that's what keeps the identity alive. And it's not just
mm,
alive, it's more about like even rediscovering the identity. It would be kind of human to say that like we kind of lost it. There are so many fragmentations and so much pain. We do need to kind of discover it, and kind of we need to focus on like April 25th. That's what I feel, because we are so much in April 24th and in the past. So I really think that idea of time is very important for us. And the way I approach that, I almost feel like this, I try to ignore the past. I just try to work with time and try to see our identity as just a big phenomena that cannot be kind of cut or destroyed. I think that's what gives me a sense of dignity and kind of empowers my work. And I also realized I don't have to explain this to other cultures. Yeah, I don't have to kind of claim it verbally, at least. So that's why these conversations are very valuable for me. I don't have to make an effort to, kind of explain things that are or like are true. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
or
work with
justify that.
time is important. I think we work with time, all artists, especially painters, especially Jackie's work, this connection to Guernica, and like how we're going to tell these stories without being seen as just like small nations. Like yeah, that scale doesn't fit me. That's why I tend to create materials, even though this my lab is supposed to be a lab, but my materials are 4-6 meter long. That's how I try to kind of challenge this design culture here in Netherlands, which is very much focused on production and business. But yeah, I'm always thinking, okay, what would an Armenian do? Yeah, you would do something with a scale. So scale is a very important thing for me. Yes, and scale and time. I try to just work between these two things
Time is,
basically.
I think time is really fascinating, or what's sticking out to me when I hear you both speak, because you both spoke about time and time in the Armenian context of the different, not phases, I don't think that's the word I'm looking for, but the different moments in the experience of Armenia and the diaspora. There are these defined times where, we refer to when this happened, or as you say, April 24th, like the dates and times are quite distinct in the experience. So it's interesting, Shushanik, to hear you talk about the relevance of time in your work. And then Jackie, for you in the big piece, for example, going back to that, what you were trying to capture in scale, but also in time and represent. So that's, not a thread I was expecting to hear, but a really interesting one. Yeah, go ahead, Jackie.
I'd like to, when I looked at your work, Shushanik, one of the things that struck me as being similar to what I'm really interested in, people having their own personal physical experience. I saw a video where people were walking in an exhibition of your work where they were hanging from the ceilings and touching them, and I also have that impulse of I do very, very large paintings, and part of my motivation for that is I do want scale to kind of overwhelm them, and then and also allow them to physically feel and have a physical experience, because so much of so much art is don't touch, don't touch, don't,
Exactly.
and just use your eyes. And so I know I'm very much an optical painter, but I make large paintings because of sort of that impulse to invite people to have a physical experience too.
Yeah, this
That's
is a
fascinating.
wonderful
I wouldn't have thought
connection.
of that. Yeah, I wouldn't have seen that in looking at both of your works. I would have defaulted to that, kind of your backgrounds and your histories were the main connection. But yeah, hearing you both speak about what kind of reaction or sensation you want to create for people when they consume your work, and that you want it to be an experience that either promotes additional thought or gets them to feel a certain way, which I guess art in general, that's what we're looking for. But interesting when you have those ideas of memory or history embedded in that as well, possibly for people who've never come across these kind of themes. On the note of theme, actually, are there particular stories or threads from the diasporic experience that you feel compelled or excited to preserve in your work, in particular to a diasporic experience? So now you're both out of Armenia, right? You're both living outside of Armenia. What part of the diaspora experience do you think art could help tell the story of?
In my experience, I think aloneness, but it's also about the personality. I'm a type of uh, person, something that should be alone. Otherwise, I become very destructive and try to force people my opinion. So I realized in order to be productive, I need to stay alone. And distance from Armenia definitely helped me to really see, kind of see myself and see what I want to do, not for Armenia, but for my culture. Yes, for my identity. Inside Armenia, I could not sense it. I was just on the streets, in the, in all that, there were like young people closing the streets and demonstrating. I was one of those very impulsive and true, of course. Yeah, I was part of that generation. But then I realized I need to put my energy into something much sharper. And yes, Amsterdam does have a lot of space for something new because culture here is very clear. It is innovative, but in terms of aesthetics, yeah, thanks God there was a lot of space for me. Yeah, and it's not as rich as it might seem, even in design. So I could see that gap, and that's where I would like to connect to Jackie when I saw her works online, and I wish I could see it because that's a totally different experience in real life. I was like, the first thing I thought was like, if I was slightly a more like elegant person, I would just do my materials as art pieces, but because I'm so ambitious and I'm competing with, I hope my Dutch friends are not going to hear this, but I'm kind of like competing with all the Dutch design scene, and I'm like Armenians, they're going to be the best ones, the first ones, and that my ambition takes over. Yes, that's why I'm doing design. But honestly, when I like, painting is an absolute luxury. It's the space where you are truly alone, and you can definitely like work with time and also matter. And I work with material in a more like design kind of format, but I can instantly connect, to format of painting, and that's where it makes me even more like, when I'm done with design, I'm finally gonna jump into the real art form. Yeah, so there's always this kind of also fight between formats, because today everything is so interdisciplinary, everything is mixing up, and I don't like feeling that painting and this huge classic art can be somehow kind of bended under this modern like technology and all the things. So it's very, very important to keep that alive, I think. Yeah, this
So
switch more towards.
that's okay, but the theme of like alone, and I would go so far as to say possibly loneliness as well, is a very distinct diasporic experience, from conversations I've had and things we've heard, and possibly that sense of kind of being alone, even being surrounded by people in a new place. So alone, not in the sense that you are always physically alone, though I know for you, in terms of your work, that's how you facilitate that art and that representation. But for others, in terms of alone in identity, right? So possibly being the only person, with certain factors of identity or coming from a certain place, even if you're not actually physically alone. When you don't have community to connect to because you're part of a diaspora, then you have that sense of loneliness. Jackie, for you, is that something that you would identify as part of the diasporic experience and then coming into art, or the opposite?
I mean, for Shushanik, one of the things that strikes me is the fact that you have this sort of an acceptance of the dissolution of materials. You're sort of embrace this dissolution of materials, right? And so I think that I, I sense in my work, there's like an acceptance about uncertainty and failure and fragility and and not trying to control things completely.
Yes.
So you're in a culture which, everything's kind of like that, but perhaps it's a distinction that's similar in that, not allowing the materials to sort of speak for themselves a little bit. I also have that experience, although it's in the studio. I think of my studio as a lab in many ways, and when I talk about it. And in terms of narratives, I think that I use a lot of narratives about like perseverance. I did some paintings um, about the wounded trees, like the way seeing growth patterns on things that have had something abrupt happen to them. And I've done things about weather, which is very fleeting and temporal, and and also breath. I've done a series of works about just breath. Um, and sweat patterns, which I think I've always been fascinated with people's sweat patterns. Um, because I think of them like as emblems of effort. They're so distinctive to people's bodies,
Like a
and they also,
fingerprint.
yeah, like a fingerprint. And
Mm.
so I think those are some of the things that I think I attribute to this kind of I attribute to my upbringing as an Armenian,
Mm.
sort of seeing that perseverance and all those qualities as being um, things that were heralded.
And the disruption too, right? When you talk about kind of wounded trees and
Mhm.
continuous disruptions, and then where does the growth path go from there? And then you get into the whole conversation of roots and branches, and you can really start to see where diaspora and where being away from an ancestral homeland comes into that. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I've really been loving this thematic topic around art because it takes us to a different place and a different manifestation of the experience of being part of diaspora that we don't see in traditional books and conversations and the kind of academic literature as much, right? And I think the artistic representations can evolve a lot quicker because it comes from experience more. Another big question in terms of identity, and we've talked a lot, we've almost entirely our conversation today has been about representing Armenian identity and things, right? Memory and narratives and themes. But you are both artists in your own right. And we know, and we were talking about this actually before we started recording, right? The kind of expectation to put your personal identity as well, your personal experiences as a singular human into your work and choose this identity and kind of make a comment on that. So how do you balance having a perhaps distinct cultural identity with your personal artistic vision and what you wish to create and have fun with and just experiment with? How do you you have so many inroads coming into a piece, right? All of these different things to consider and weight to give to. How do you navigate that?
I
Big question.
honestly don't know. I don't see myself from outside. That's a trouble
Mm,
for people surrounding me because I don't see myself. Yes, I most of the times, as Jackie, thank you so much for your last response because sometimes I need to hear it in order to understand. Uh, Working with uncertainty, I think um, it's the same with identity. My work and my identity both are standing on one ground, and that would be with one word: uncertainty.
mm,
I, it's, I never start my work from an idea. I always start from this sense of I have no idea who I am, and that's what kind of makes me anxious in a way. And yeah, it begins with this kind of very anxious state of mind, I would say. But
mm,
then when I work with the material, I start like casting it, working with hands, and then time goes on, and I do another layer, another. And once when I decided to do this large material, I said, let it be like 9 meters long, And then I added charcoal. I said, let it be dark, like very Armenian. I was very angry. And then, yeah, next morning, the entire material cracked. And that's where I realized that, yeah, what I intend to do and what kind of happens, yes, that's the experiment. And I think, yeah, my work and my identity, they are always in this kind of waves. And the moment it's like resonance, the moment they come into same point, I think that's where my work gains, at least aesthetically, it gains power. But it doesn't happen with planning and with intention. No, I would say in my case, I cannot take any credit. It's happening slightly accidental, however random it might sound. But I feel I am kind of under some kind of experience that I cannot name. But the moment I start working, like I start sweating, yes, and yeah, casting a 9-meter long material in a tiny studio, it's hard. It kind of goes outside of your windows and you become messy and people get scared. But it's really kind of it's very exciting, and I have no idea which way it will go. Yes, and only after that, when, for example, my material cracked, I realized, okay, I'm gonna name this Artsakh. Yes, and then it kind of happens afterwards. The identity comes at the end of the work for me.
That's such a fascinating way to look at it. And I love hearing you speak about kind of this out of body experience you have when you start creating, and that the piece takes you with it, right? The piece is almost like sentient now. And you're just like along for this journey and this ride, and you're trying to respond to what it's asking you to give it. And yeah, so I need a little like camera to watch you in the lab at work, and just, I think it would be so fascinating. Jackie, for you, is that a different, when you set out to create a new piece or to embark on a new series, does that feel resonant, that experience, or do you kind of flip it on its head and no? Same thing? You're just in the lab working?
I don't think of my work. Well, this is where it is. I'm really interested in, aside from the work that I've done that has touched on Armenia and my Armenian ancestry and identity and my family, I've always had that pop up once in a while. But for the most part, I'm really interested in, I'm interested in perception, and that may be related to how I've been perceived, and people didn't really know who I was, what I was. They always, I grew up in a community that had no Armenians in it, and so the rest of my work is about trying to loosen up people's ways of making judgments about what they're looking at. A lot of my work is very optical and sort of plays with ways of depicting things and space. I work a lot with, as an abstract painter, I work a lot with space and how you perceive distance, how you perceive form, how you perceive light, and I like to make people hyper aware. I want them to become hyper aware of the decisions that they're making when they're looking at it. So it's very different from, I think it's very different from, the work that was related to my Armenian ancestry.
Fascinating. Yeah, well, you're in that experience. I'm as you're speaking, I'm kind of picturing myself having experience with one of your pieces of work, and that when you said you want people to be conscious of the decisions they're making, you're kind of, to me, it sounds like wanting them to know why they're choosing to identify with certain pieces. So we're coming back to that identity, right? So when they're taking in a piece of your work and they're choosing to perceive this in a certain way, those are all conscious, subconscious choices we make, which, to your point, is exactly how we interact with each other as humans, right? What choices do we make? What do we choose to identify with when we meet someone new? When we all seek those moments of connection, right? And we want to feel akin with someone, or we want to understand them better by finding a piece of commonality. And it's very telling what we choose to connect on. right? We've all done it today about history and topics that we are interested in, but we could have just as easily done it on the last place we traveled to, right? Or books we've read. So I do think there's always something purposeful in how we choose to identify ourselves and identify one another. What a big and broad, possibly, way to end today's conversation. We've covered a lot of ground in the last, it feels like it's been 10 minutes, and I could talk to you both for another few hours. But I will wrap us up there today. Thank you both for this conversation, for not only sharing your own lived experience, but also talking about your work, which is equally as vulnerable, I'm sure, and equal parts exciting. And I know it's been a lovely conversation for me. And I'm going to remind everyone listening again, please do use the show notes to read up more about our wonderful guests and to look at some of their works. They're available. I know maybe you won't be able to see them in person as we would all like to, but you can certainly see some of the fantastic creative contributions they've been talking about. So thank you both. That wraps us up for today. Well, that is all for our episode today. Thank you again for tuning in and listening to another episode of Dispersion, a podcast by the Zorin Institute, a nonprofit organization that serves the cause of scholarship and public awareness relating to issues of universal human rights, genocide, and diaspora-homeland relations. If you'd like to learn more about diaspora studies or about the Zorin Institute's other projects and programs, we invite you to visit our website at www.zorininstitute.org and find us across all your social media platforms at Zorin Institute.